Hi, my name's Stephen Thompson. I'm with Van Allen Institute. If you don't know who we are, we're a nonprofit based in the Flatiron District, just a bit north of here. We're so excited to be participating at IdeasCity today, and we're presenting a program called Crossroads Conversations. So at Van Allen Institute, we believe in the power of public space. We've been involved in transforming public spaces in New York City and around the world to make them better for everyday people. How can they support people's well-being? How can they be protected against climate change and other threats to the environment? And we launched Crossroads Conversations in Times Square. There are the red steps there that some of you might know about that are the result of a Van Allen competition to activate that space. And so we might all recall from November last year, it was a quite contentious election. It was clear that our society was a bit divided. People from different sides of the aisle weren't necessarily speaking to one another. And we wondered, how could we bring people together outside of the silos of social media and their own groups of friends and family that they might share a lot of similar views with? And so we thought, well, public space is where you actually might brush shoulders with people with varying viewpoints who might disagree with you, might agree with you, but still have a totally different perspective. And so we invite strangers to come together for just 10 minutes, have a facilitated conversation, and share their views in public space. And so we're in Sara D, Roosevelt Park today, and we have Vanessa Quirk, the editor at Sidewalk Labs, here to get people talking. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and have our first participants introduce themselves.
I guess I'll start, and then I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. I'm Vanessa Quirk. I work for a company called Sidewalk Labs, which is a company owned by Google. And so what they're really trying to do is figure out how can we make city life better through the use of technology. So we're constantly thinking about what is the future city? How can the future city be more livable, just, sustainable overall for everyone? So that's me in a nutshell. And Jeff, why don't you start? Who are you? Where do you come from? And what's your favorite part of the city?
Cool. Hi, I'm Jeff Ravid.
I think a little closer to the mic.
Sorry. I'm Jeff Ravid. I live actually right down the street on Haston Street over here, and I work also in the Flatiron area, doing analytics, data science for a media company.
Cool.
My favorite part about New York City is definitely all the parks. I'm a big into biking, so I love all the bike lanes and how accessible it is to kind of get, even though you're in a huge city, it's great to spend time in a park, and it's so easy in New York, so I love that.
Awesome. Go ahead, Carly.
Hi, my name's Carly Haywood. I'm a design student at Parsons School for Design, and I also work for Ghetto Gastro, which is a creative culinary collective from the Bronx. We collaborate with different companies and brands and create experiences at the intersection of art and design and culinary expertise. And my favorite part about New York City in general, I guess, is the diversity and just the momentum of the city and how it influences me and motivates me to keep progressing.
Okay, awesome. So before we start thinking about the future, I want to think a little bit about the present so that we can think about ways that the present might inform what the future city might be, right? So you guys have just talked a little bit about what you love about the city right now. So parks, bike lanes, diversity, movement, like vibrancy. When you think about the future, are there things that worry you? Like, what do you think could go wrong in the future New York City?
What worries me, especially as a student who's trying to figure out financially how to be stable, is the cost of living here. I currently live in Harlem, and I have a roommate, and we're able to make rent with our small, kind of starting jobs that hopefully turn into careers. But looking to the future, I see a lot more gentrification, and I see a lot more just property ownership that's being put into the wrong hands, and the cost of living just going up and up and up. And I fear that New York will become a city for rich people. So hopefully we can change that before it happens, but that's one of my fears.
And I think a city for rich people alone, right, is the fear, because
Yes.
it's already has a very sizable rich population here. But I think the marvelous thing about New York City right now is that there is room for everybody. There is, like you were saying before, and diversity in different people. And definitely, I think cost of housing is one of those things that could potentially just make us homogeneous and only for the elites, which would completely ruin New York, in my opinion. What
Yes.
about you, Jeff? What are the things that worry you about the
Yeah,
future?
I think along those same lines, kind of like the character of the city. I think kind of we're losing that sometimes as kind of like the mom and pop shops are getting forced out because of the increase in rent and everything. You're getting a lot of chains moving in. I feel like what used to be like a great mom and pop restaurant in the Lower East Side is being turned into like a McDonald's or like a Target moving in, or I saw yesterday like Taco Bell's opening like 50 restaurants in New York. So it's sad to me that a lot of the places the institutions that make New York great aren't able to stay because of the increase in rent and
Yeah.
affordability issues.
Do you guys think that there's anything that normal people like you and me can do to kind of make sure that the city is accessible for more than just the rich or more than just huge big box retailers to move in and kind of destroy the character of neighborhoods? Do you think it lies in the hands of government? Like, to what extent can we actually impact our future city?
I think that if we build community amongst ourselves and develop a voice to government officials and be able to speak with governors and people in charge of properties and the structures, that's one way. Being able to talk to them, like in council meetings or community leadership meetings, and really just vote for who's working towards being on our side and working towards like having or keeping New York as diverse as it is.
Okay, so just to kind of think to like sum up what you were saying, it's like coming together as a community, like making sure we're collaborating, making sure we have a voice so that our voice is heard, that collaborative voice is heard, and then also just getting out and voting for the people that are going to pay attention to our voice.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah? Cool. What about you, Jeff? What do you think are the ways that we can potentially make an impact in the city, which kind of sometimes feels too big for like one person or a few people to change?
Yeah, I think it definitely is too big for one person to make a difference. So I think it definitely, like as you mentioned, kind of coming together as a community, civic action, and engaging in our government is something super important. I think voter turnout for local elections is always really low, and it would be great if that was changed and people were a little bit more involved. And I think one of the good things that came out of the election of 2016 is that I think people are going to get more involved now because they see like how important it is and how big the stakes are, and so I hope that's one thing that changes.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that post-election people have been more activated, and we've seen more people kind of protesting, potentially kind of getting involved in their local community initiatives. How do you see that changing in the future? Like, is there a way that technology or social media is going to allow us to do this better? Or do you think that it's actually going to make us more isolated rather than come together?
I think it's tough. I think it depends on the person. I think some people are very into their own stuff, and they don't really they have a good life. They don't really care so much about what's happening around them. As long as they have a good job and have a place to live, then they're not so conscious of what's happening in the city or in the country. But I think it's up to the government officials themselves to use those mediums, whether it be social media or TV or whatever, to try to engage especially the younger population a bit more, people who are more active on social media, and instead of checking your Twitter feed for like funny jokes and memes and sports scores, you can take a couple minutes out of your day to understand what's going on in the city. I think would be great. I think the government can do a bit of a better job being more fun about it, not be so serious. Kind of just speaking towards that younger generation a bit better.
I mean, do you agree, Carly? Do you think it's like in the hands of government officials to do a better job of speaking to us?
I feel like it always has been, and I feel like at times like no matter what we do, they don't have to listen to us. But in terms of like the social media relationship with like instilling change, I think that there needs to be a balance. Like
Okay.
we need to be on social media, but we also need to be in person and hands on and taking action on the ground and really build a strong leadership role in that, because in social media it's like everyone feels like they're their own leader. Everyone is kind of their own individual force, and I think that if there's like a strong presence of leadership on social media and in the streets, then people will follow. And because sometimes, like you said, social media thing can get out of hand, and people just think that liking something or tagging something means that they're getting involved and making a
Right.
change. But it takes both, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to be able to take advantage of how to manipulate social media to our advantage and reach as many people as we can through that, but then be active like in real life as well.
Right. So we only have like 30 seconds left, actually. So just to wrap up, do you guys want to tell me like the one thing you'd love to see in your future New York City? It can be like super basic, like more bike lanes, or it could be like, I want all cars to be autonomous. I don't know. Anything. What do you think?
No traffic.
No traffic. Excellent.
Dang. I don't know.
How about you work with food, like a
Yes,
a food
better food options in low-income communities.
Uh-huh. Like just no more food deserts. Awesome food for all.
Yes. Yes.
All right, cool. Well, thank you guys both so much. I hope you had fun, and
Thank
it was
you.
really
This has
cool
been
to
great.
pick your brains about
Yeah.
New York
Thank
in the
you.
future. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, that was fun. Yeah, absolutely.
We live.
Steven gives us the okay. Well, we good to go, Steven? Yeah? Okay. All right, just to recap, I'm Vanessa Quirk. In case you didn't hear who I am, I'm an editor. I work at a company called Sidewalk Labs. It's owned by Google, and we're really trying to think about how cities can be improved through technology. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the problems in our current cities and how we can make our future cities more equitable, sustainable, livable for all. So that's who I am. Let's start with Tom. Where are you from? What brought you here today? And what's your favorite part of New York City?
I'm originally from Boise, Idaho. I've lived in New York for close to a decade, work in education. Heard about this through multiple friends who are involved in different capacities. And favorite part about New York, I don't know, love New York. So it's hard to...
You love New York, you said? Or?
Yeah, I love New York. I don't know if I can pinpoint one thing that,
What makes it most different from Boise, Idaho?
that's a long conversation.
Okay. All right, we'll come back to that. Jerry, right? Can you introduce us to you?
Hi there, I'm Jerry. Lived in New York for nearly 5 years, originally from Melbourne, Australia.
Great.
What brought me to the city? I guess my ambitions in radio broadcasting and kind of experiencing a city where a divergence of cultural and intellectual sort of, I guess, resources exist. Favorite part about the city? I don't know. It's difficult. I'm becoming grumpier and grumpier these days. But I really love the diversity where it exists, expressed in many ways.
Okay. So it sounds like you guys are a little bit more critical, perhaps, than... Well, you said you love it and you just couldn't think of something specific. But so I'm going to pick your brains now. What is the thing that you least like about living in New York and that you would most like to see change in the future?
Again, I think it's hard to pinpoint individual items in the sense that like a lot of these issues end up being pretty systemic. And so if we're thinking about, I mean, the underinvestment in infrastructure and the disparate ways that impacts people based on a cross, like intersectional set of variables, I think is probably the most fundamental problem. But that manifests itself in many different ways. Like the subway is the most obvious, but if you think about our other fundamental infrastructures around trash and water and sewage, I think that maybe the more foundational issue in my mind is the insufficient degree of ambition in facing like species level potential threats to survival.
Like too much short-term thinking and not kind
Yeah.
of long-term ambition in terms of overhauling our infrastructural systems.
Right.
Cool. And responsibility for that, who do you think it should lie on?
Well, I'm very heartened by citizen initiatives and all of the immense creativity and ambition and initiative that's happening at local level, grassroots level. I think that there are clear barriers to scale and implementation of certain types of, like citizens can't really overhaul the MTA. And so, to the extent that it's possible, you need a more publicly minded and sane and actual like civic, like city government, state government, national government. But those are questions on such a scale that like I can't really,
Right.
I'm aware of that, but like do I have a plan for like how we accomplish that? No, I don't.
Right. I think sane was a very apt descriptor for a kind of government we could use to get those infrastructures off the ground. Jerry, what's one of the things that you dislike most about New York City that you'd most like to see change in the future?
I don't dislike the city per se.
Well, no, not the city overall, but like, I imagine there's things about it.
Oh,
that
there are
kind-
definitely things
yeah.
that trouble me. I mean, but I think to come back to that. I mean, I think that people move to the city with intentions that potentially affect the city. In terms of how it's shaped and how it's sort of designed and how it's sort of inhabited. And so that brings me to my answer to your question, and that is inequality. Because I think when you come to a city like New York, you have to kind of accept it
Yep.
for all of its sort of instability, its dirtiness, its unpredictability, its diversity. I mean, all the things that might make us uncomfortable from time to time, you kind of just have to cop. So I really don't like the inequality, and I really don't like. I mean, what I recognise is that that's the one of the foundational issues that lead to a lot of other issues. A lot of issues stem from that. So I really dislike that.
Do you think that, I mean, you were saying before that when it comes to kind of overhauling infrastructures and these like massive issues that we have, like public transport, like waste, it requires very ambitious long-term thinking and essentially kind of top-down planning in a lot of ways. Is there a way that if we were able to have a kind of ambitious top-down plan for this future of our city that would make it run faster and more efficiently and cleaner, is there still a way that we can maintain that unpredictability, that dirtiness, that quality, that the kind of chaotic nature of New York City that makes it New York? Like, is there a room for those two visions? And if so, any ideas about how?
Well,
It's a big question.
Tokyo is pretty chaotic and it's not dirty, right? I don't think that the romance of like New York in the 70s or in the 20s or any other era where our fundamental systems were essentially failing at certain levels, constitutes like I think what people love is the diversity, the energy, the vibrance, and like you don't have to be dirty to have that. Now, coincidentally, those two things intersected, but I think that it would probably be easier to love New York if it was the same chaotic, vibrant place, with diversities, as Jerry pointed out, but also characterized by well-functioning systems and, as sane. And yeah, I mean, it would definitely help if there was some top-down plan for approaching certain issues that we as individuals can't tackle around like climate breakdown in particular. Because we simply can't do enough at the grassroots level to offset the immense failures of like policy and corporate responsibility or utter lack of responsibility. But how we get to a point where you actually have that type of like will that doesn't just get co-opted by the exact forces that are responsible for so many of the problems in the first place is like a much stickier question in my opinion.
Definitely.
My sense is that, I totally agree. My sense is that we need to sort of organize and kind of create artifacts that represent these ideas and make the argument to people that are more apathetic or less interested or less active and kind of gradually create this sort of shift. I mean, again, to your point, there are vast institutional and environmental and issues and stuff that we can't even touch as just regular people. But if we band together and find commonalities, even if we're completely different, which is the idea of this series, then maybe we can sort of unite around specific things and get things done.
So we only have about a minute left. So I think I'm going to end with one question, thinking about what do you think that is the future of public space and public action?
So let me just, I want to point to a couple examples recently even of the folks in Seneca Lake who have succeeded in stopping the construction of a fracked gas storage facility underneath the lake itself. The citizen activism that seems for the time being to have stopped the activation of a 650 megawatt fracked gas power plant in Middleton, New York, for examples of exactly what Jerry's talking about. When we think about public space, I think a lot of it comes back to, again, people finding the necessary uses. I think that in New York, right now, if you look at a hyper-militarized police force that we're dealing with, there are some ominous, developments, to say the least, about what public space is. Whether it's that, there's a long conversation. So, yeah, I'll leave it at a hopeful note about
in the interest of time.
But yeah.
I think that the number one thing in terms of public space has to be a recognition of it and a preservation of it.
Yeah.
That's just the number one thing.
Yeah.
Because if we allow private enterprise to create so-called public space and allow that to dominate, that narrative to continue, then we're going to lose public space. So we have to be very, very mindful of what that does in terms of our communities, what that does for the things that we can't even tangibly describe within our cities. In terms of where you work, Vanessa, Sidewalk Labs, you're looking at technology and data and looking at how these cities function. You're trying to quantify that in a sense. So we need to recognize the role of public space in providing for whatever unspecific or specific outcome may come from it, but just the importance of shared space where people from different backgrounds maybe coalesce and maybe they don't even talk to each other, but maybe they just recognize
that they
the
exist.
fact that they all kind of belong to that space. They all have a right to that space. It's about equity.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate your stopping by to talk.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah, man.
Okay. Well, thank you both for stopping by to have a bit of a chat about our city and its future. Just to recap, my name is Vanessa. Vanessa Quirk. I am an editor at a company called Sidewalk Labs. It's owned by Google, and we're looking at ways technology can make our cities kind of more livable, equitable, sustainable, all that jazz. So let's start with Mars. Would you mind introducing yourself? Who are you? Where are you from? What brought you here today?
Hi, my name is Mars. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I currently live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a member of Decolonize This Place, which we actually have a booth here at IdeasCity. So that's kind of what brought me here.
So what does that organization do?
Yeah, so Decolonize This Place started as we were a pop-up show at Artist Space Gallery, a pop-up residency, 3 months, and we focused on 5 strands: indigenous struggle, black liberation, free Palestine, the global wage worker, and de-gentrification. And since then, we've grown, and we're about 20-plus grassroots organizations who collaborate together.
Interesting. Okay, very cool. And Diane, can you introduce yourself? Where are you from? What brought you here today? And what do you do?
Oh, sure. My name's Diane Hawkins. I'm from a small town.
Feel free to put the mic a little closer.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm from a small town on Long Island.
Called?
Called Baldwin.
Okay, I'm from Cold Spring Harbor.
Oh, and I'm at a Unitarian church in a town called Freeport, and I've tried different art projects for bringing community together. I've not always been successful. I mean, it goes both ways, but I'm here because the idea of culture and art may be leading the way in transformation of towns or cities or suburbs, I think is very important.
Okay, great. Well, let's start there because that seems to be a common thread between you guys, the role of art in the city. Mars, when you think about art, what can art and artists do for a city, and what are the potential negative implications of encouraging artists, if there are any, into city space?
Well, as an artist, I find that the top thing is accountability, right?
Okay.
So at Decolonize This Place, we think of the role of an artist as kind of like a Trojan horse, right?
Okay.
This thing that you send in beforehand at the start of a battle. So we think of it in terms of like displacement and gentrification.
A Trojan horse for ideas.
For gentrification.
For gentrification.
Yes.
So,
one
to disrupt
example-
gentrification or to
encourage
catalyze
it.
it? Okay.
So one example is Chinatown. In the past 6 years, over 120 galleries have opened in Chinatown because the galleries were priced out of Chelsea.
Right.
So from the artist's point of view, it's very problematic because there's not enough space to show your work.
Right.
But if you're a resident of Chinatown and you've been a resident of Chinatown, you're getting priced out of your home just so that an artist can show their work. So it's problematic in a way. So as an artist, I feel like it's huge to have accountability to the communities in which you're working with. So if you're going to show art, who are you kicking out of their home to show that art? So as an artist, I'm constantly asking these questions.
Right. Do you think that there's value in bringing art to a neighborhood like Chinatown, despite the kind of potential for its implications on housing?
Well, I feel like you don't need to bring art to Chinatown because there's Chinese artists in Chinatown. So then the question actually is it okay to bring like Western art or Eurocentric valued art to Chinatown? And honestly, that goes back to a question of colonization. So it's like, if you are someone who has money to open a gallery, then are you propping up the citizens, the artists, the Chinese artists who are in that community, who were there before the artists got there? Or are you bringing in like Eurocentric American, white, specifically male artists to a Chinese community and displacing people? There's two different ways you can go about doing it.
I guess, I mean, to be devil's advocate, and I'll definitely let you jump in and if you want to, Diana, but just to be devil's advocate, I mean, we would never want to say who can live where, right? You would never want to say, like, you're only allowed to live here, like, right? You wouldn't want to say to an artist, you can, if you're from Chinatown, you can only ever live and work in Chinatown, right? Like, we have human agency, and we want to be able to, I mean, I think part of what makes the city interesting is the diversity of the movement, right? So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, too? Because we want people to interact, we want people to have conversations, and we don't want to exist in silos either, right?
Well, when you're moving to these communities, are you integrating into the community, or are you demanding that the community changes for you?
Right.
Are you erasing the narrative of the Chinese folks who lived in Chinatown, or are you trying to substitute their narrative with your own? Are you trying to cause a people to go into extinction or not? And that's what gentrification is, right? So, of course, you can move, and that goes back to this idea of even like, what is a native New Yorker?
Right, exactly.
Are you a native New Yorker because your parents lived here?
Right.
Are we not considering the Ramapo Lenape, who owned this land before colonialization? And so it's important to think of this like we're all settlers, right? Even myself included, living in Brooklyn and moving to Brooklyn. Like, of course, I have the right to move to Brooklyn. But when I move to Brooklyn, what am I doing?
What's your responsibility?
Exactly. And that goes back to accountability. If you're accountable to the community in which you're in, then that's one thing. But if you're not accountable, then you're just a part of the issue.
So what about you, Diane? Because you're working not necessarily in the city, but also kind of in smaller towns. I mean, how do you see the role of art in the city now, and why do you think it's important to preserve or bring to these smaller towns?
Well, I think you get to feel very isolated out in these little towns, and you're not thinking in a very inclusive way. And I need the shot of something I get from coming here that's very important to me, rather than, working in my basement or working in my church. I think of, I don't know if part of the question is all what I'm trying to do to some extent is create art for sacred places. So we have a Unitarian church, but I think we haven't been successful in bringing in the community. We have day laborers in our community, and so I don't know how to bridge, say, a church community with the wider community, which I think is one of the things we should be doing, or I want us to do.
So in a certain extent, you would kind of using art in order to inject the diversity of opinion and thought that you would kind of more naturally come across in a city because of the natural fact of density and interaction?
Well, yeah, and I also think where in the small towns or in the suburbs do we get together? You know, a church is one place, but
Yeah.
you know, in civic places and public schools. But I'm trying to think of that as well. Like in the city, it seems more obvious where we come together and bump up against everybody from all over
Right.
the world.
But I think this is an interesting point, Diane, too, and something I think about a lot is a sense of community in a city, because despite the fact that we bump into each other and we like are amongst people, it doesn't mean that we belong to a community. And do you think about how do you create community, assuming that this is an important thing that we want in our cities, a sense of community and belonging? How do we create that in our present cities and in the future? Are these things that, Marcy, are you thinking about these things?
Yeah, I'm always thinking about these things. I feel like, too, as someone who's not from here, who just moved here for graduate school, as I'm always thinking, too, of not just going into a place and creating something, but, like, what community is there and what can I add to it? Like, as an artist, you know, as a teacher, as an educator, what talents do I have that can add to that community to, like, further that community? So I feel that's, like, super important. So, like, I live in Williamsburg, right? And Williamsburg is an up-and-coming art center, but the people who lived there before there were Puerto Rican. And so, as knowing that, moving to a Puerto Rican community, how can I still be an artist but still uplift the Puerto Rican resistance? And so, like, immediately that's, like, on my mind. Like, I moved there, which is fine. I moved there. I'm an artist. It's dope. But, like, how can I go there and then become a part, but also add myself? But never to create new communities, because the community's already there. Always just to add and enhance.
I mean, I think you're defining community, it seems like, in certain extent ethnically, like who, and historically, right? Like who was there before me, and like what are the conditions that like brought them there.
Exactly. Respecting the land, respecting their ancestors, respect. It's all about respect.
Right. I guess, and I think my question maybe got back to more of the idea of community in the sense of a coming together for a common purpose. You know what I mean? Do you feel like, as an artist or as someone who works in the art space, like, is that something that art can do? Can it bring people together for a collective purpose, whether it be political action or whether it be kind of just diversity of thought? And this is probably going to be the last question because we've only got a minute left. But
Well, it changes you. I mean, art changes you. We had, you know, in our church space, we had an exhibit of trans people who had been killed, who had been murdered. And this wonderful artist created their portraits. So it changes, and I'm not sure if this is part of your question, but it changes
your perspective.
now my relationship to the trans community, because she also included the stories of these people. So I know their stories, I know what happened to them. And without that, I lack connection to different groups. I think.
And that's totally the power. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think churches is a great place too to establish these types of communities. And churches within the city too, specifically like after 2014 when Black Lives Matter hit, a lot of churches in the city came together that are completely like not even related, just to support that. Or when Hurricane Sandy came, the amount of churches, and then art also, like supporting, and the artists that come through for healing, the art that's needed to heal those people in those tragedies. Yeah.
I think that's amazing how kind of certain situations can activate places that already existed physically and the kind of, you know, communities that they represent, and going to reactivate and make us more aware of their existence. So you might have passed by like all of those churches like 3 years ago, and then it's only in a new context that you see your city in new eyes, and they take a new kind of importance or significance in your city and in your day, in your life. So wonderful. Thank you guys so much. It's a really interesting conversation. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys for joining us. Just to recap for anyone that doesn't know, you probably all do at this point. My name is Vanessa Quirk. I work for a company called Sidewalk Labs. We're really interested, it's a company owned by Google, so we're really interested in looking at how technology can actually make our cities more livable, equitable, and sustainable. You sound like you have thoughts already. I'll come back to you though, Angel. Maeve, can you introduce yourself? Who are you? Where do you come from? What brought you here today?
My name's Maeve. I'm from Manchester. Well, I'm not. I'm from the northeast of England. It's very important in England that we say the exact place that we're from. And I'm here just on holiday, visiting these lovely people.
Great. And sorry, and what do you do?
I work for a political think tank who do public policy in the north of England.
Brilliant. Okay, Angel, can you introduce yourself? Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you do? What brought you here?
My name is
wait,
Angel.
bring that mic a little closer.
Micah, I'm sorry. My name is Angel. I'm from Puerto Rico, Carolina, Puerto Rico, but I live in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a barber. My birthday is September 28th.
Okay.
I'll be 40 years old.
I'll be 40 years old. Okay. Can you guys tell me what is the thing, and you as a visitor and you as someone who's lived here for how many years now?
Probably like 20 years.
20 years. Okay, so you've been here a good long time.
Yeah.
What are the things about New York that you like the most? Let's start with that. What do you like the most so far? And for you and your 20-year experience here, and you and your few days or whatever it was.
The people.
The people.
Yeah, the people. I love the people of New York.
Uh-huh.
And
Keep that mic a little closer.
my son was born in the Bronx.
Yeah.
My nieces is from the Bronx. My sister live in the Bronx. So I'm from New York, from the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. That's all I know.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So the people, the community.
The community, yeah. My
Yeah.
family too.
Brilliant. You, Maeve?
Yeah, I've been here 2 days, and the people seem lovely, but the food.
The food. Okay. The diversity of the food.
I mean, there's a lot of food, and it's all really delicious, and the portion sizes are great.
Got it.
And I'm really full all the time.
Got it. Yep. What's so far the things that you least like about New York City? And then I'll come back to you, Angel.
It's not specific to New York, but we were meeting our friend yesterday who's 7 months pregnant.
Okay.
And I find it quite disturbing that people don't get we get 9 months maternity leave in the UK.
Okay.
I find the maternity packages quite distressing, and the fact that maternity is classed as a disability or an illness in medical terms, which I find incredibly disturbing when.
Mm-hmm.
Even from an economic point of view, it's producing the workforce that is going to continue to create our economy.
Right.
That's upsetting.
Definitely more of a kind of an observation of our national politics than in particular to New York City, but I absolutely get the point. It people live in New York who are affected by this, and it's
one of the responses that we got was that women in New York are career-driven and want to go back to work straight away, and I find that that's really problematic that you can't be career-driven and also be able to raise a child. I think that's and it's not specific to New York, but I've only been here 2 days.
Got it. What about you, Angel? What do you dislike most about New York? What would you most like to see change?
The weather.
The weather?
Yeah, the weather.
Why? What would you like it to be more like?
Like this.
Like warmer all the time?
Yeah, just like this.
Okay. So I'm gonna. So when you think about the future in New York City, right? Like, you can think of anything that you'd like to see. What would you think would be the best for New York City in the future? Because we can't really change the weather. We can't really change maternity leave policy on a national level. Like, what can we change in New York that you think would make it a better place?
I guess like place to live for the homeless people.
More places to live for the homeless people. Yeah.
I think that will be nice.
Yeah. Whose responsibility is that, do you think?
Huh?
Whose responsibility is that, do you think?
The mayor. The mayor got to take care of that.
You think it's the mayor's responsibility? Is there anything that we can do collectively? Or do you think it's only in the hands of like powerful political figures?
Well, ain't much I can do about it, but when I go help somebody in the street, give them something to eat or whatever, I help them out without a problem. But it's like a lot of people that got money, don't do nothing for the poor.
Yeah.
And nothing I could do for my people.
Don't forget about the mic.
I do for my people and everything, but man, I don't want to get too political about it.
We can get political. That's the whole point. The whole point of this conversation is to kind of get into a little controversial conversation. So if you have some political opinions, go for it.
Yeah, I can say whatever I want to, but I don't want it. Sometimes my mouth will get me in trouble because I want to say something. I don't want to just go crazy.
Okay, well, what about you, Maeve? I know that you're only a visitor, but do you think that there's something that we could potentially change to make our future New York City a better place for the people who live in it?
Well, I think New York has a massive influence globally as well. Like, we're the financial center of the world, and I think that politicians respond to people on the ground. So if we're talking about what we can do as citizens to improve our city, I think engaging in the political process. I mean, obviously there's massive problems with our political process, but that is what we have to work with at the minute. And the only way that we will change that is if people become active in it.
Right.
So I think as citizens we can put pressure on our politicians. I think like with the thing like you can't change maternity. I mean, this is a question for you. As far as I'm aware, you have like mayors that have quite significant power and are able to make domestic changes and show examples to the rest of the country, but the rest of the world as well. And I think one of the massive major problem of the world today is our economic system and the inequality that it brings, and in various different ways, and the crises that it's creating and recreating. And this is the heart of that financial system. New York is the place where this all happens. I'm not sure how much power individual citizens have, but politicians certainly do, and politicians are accountable to citizens. So it's a bit convoluted, but being more politically engaged, I think, is the first step.
Yeah.
And I think this a whole bunch of corruption. Donald Trump.
What did you say, sorry?
The president, Donald Trump. It's the first one, you know what I'm saying? So
Right.
it start everything from the top. You say political, right?
Yeah, we can get political. I think, but Maeve does bring up a good point, though. She was saying, like, when you think about what power do cities have to have change over the country, right? I mean, we think about this movement of sanctuary cities, right? Like cities like New York and like Los Angeles, really trying to be an example for what the country could be. And so when you think about it that way, I think Maeve's right. Like if we can speak if the people of the city can speak to our officials, and then our cities can lead the way and potentially affect change, then maybe there is some way that we can have power and influence.
You're right. I agree with you.
I think that people have to see change as well, though. So I think community activism is incredibly important, and changing your local environment. I think if we keep sort of lobbying national government and you don't actually see the changes that you're creating, whereas if you are able to, transform a dilapidated building into a beautiful community space, that empowers people and encourages people, and I think it's just incredibly good. And the two speakers you had before this talking about how art can transform how people think about different communities, I think that creating these spaces in your own locale is an excellent way to change.
What about you, Angel? What have you seen in the Bronx in your 20 years there? I mean, has it changed a lot? Have you seen anything that would make you kind of confident that it's going to get improved for your community?
It look good. The Bronx look good.
The Bronx is what?
It's
looking good.
Yeah, it look good. Yeah, it look clean. Got a lot of new buildings.
Yeah.
Apartment
and like, do you feel like it's like a good sign for the Bronx in general?
Yes,
and for you and your family?
Yes. Much better. You know what
And
I'm saying?
in like 5 years, what would you want the Bronx to be?
A little better than what it is right now.
How?
Like, say more business.
More businesses?
Yeah, like more jobs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? To help the community, like the young people, the kids and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? Like open barber shops, like play games, like restaurants, stuff like that. Fix the playgrounds. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Stuff for the kids.
Yeah. What about like public spaces, like parks? How do we preserve that for the future? Oh, and that's going to be our last question, I'm afraid. Is it important to have public spaces where people can gather?
Yeah, it is important.
Why?
You're free, right? It's like you don't want to feel like you keep away from the space that you're supposed to be running around, right? You're supposed to be free.
Okay, so like a public space is where you can be free.
Stay the way it is.
What about you, babe? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think that political movements are born of people getting together and deciding to create change, and they have to have a place in which to do that. And I think public places, other places where people meet, like in church or in, bars or whatever, they're not as inclusive. They can't include people from across the board. Whereas like a park, anybody can come, it's free. And I think that without places for people to meet and collaborate, then no change will be made. So I think they're essential, and I think that
And we should be cognizant if it's starting to shrink or if we're not able to access those places.
Because it's our power, and when they're not there anymore, we lose our power.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you guys both so much. I really appreciate your taking the time to chat with me. All right. Thank you guys both for sitting down and have a chat with me. To recap, my name's Vanessa Quirk. I work for a company called Sidewalk Labs. It's owned by Google, and what we're trying to do is use technology to make our cities better places. So that can be in terms of sustainability, livability, equity, all that good stuff. So that was me. Darlene, why don't we start with you? Can you introduce yourself? What's your name? Where are you from? And what do you do?
Hi, I'm Darlene. I am 17 years old, and I'm part of an organization called the Lower East Side Girls Club, which is a nonprofit aided for girls of Lower East Side.
Brilliant. What about you, Gabriel?
Hi, I'm Gabriel. I grew up in North Carolina. I've been in New York for about 7 years. I'm an architect. I work for a company called DAM, Designers, Artists, Architects, Makers. And we do projects mostly in the U.S., design projects and mostly architecture, but other types of design and collaborations as well.
Okay. So when you think about New York City, you're from the Lower East Side. You've moved here how many years ago, you said?
7 years.
7 years, so okay, 7 years. What are the things that you think are most troublesome, like the things that worry you most about your city today, and how do you think about it in the future? Like, why does it worry you now for, like, what are its implications in the future?
I mean, right now, I'm currently looking for schools. And I think one major thing a lot of people like me are going through is trying to find a school that is aided towards me. You know what I mean? Something that I could afford, something that I could get into, all of those things.
Would you want to stay in New York City if you could to study?
Yes.
Okay, and so the options for that are limited. Got it. What about you, Gabe? What are the things in the city that you kind of would like to change for the future?
I'm pretty concerned about rising floodwaters.
Floodwaters, yeah.
I lived in a building in Dumbo for about 3 years, and during Sandy, the whole first floor was underwater. I mean, I'm lucky now. I don't live in a floodplain. I'm maybe one of the safest places in the city to be, but I'm just concerned, for 20, 30, 50 years from now.
Is that something that you think about, Darlene? I mean, were you here for Hurricane Sandy? Did it impact you? And is that something that you worry about for the future, for like you or your friends or your family?
Yes, I actually experienced it firsthand. I was living next to Con Edison, so that's when that explosion happened.
Yeah.
And I just remember it. Everybody was like in fear where, I was living, and it got really bad. And like the fact that we were kind of just left in the dark for a really long time, and it felt like nobody was helping us. And I feel like that really shows how much we need to change, that whole situation.
Yeah, like what lessons do you take from that? Like what do you think is for a future city to like make sure that you and your friends and your families would be safe in those kind of situations? Like what do you think needs to happen today to make sure that it could either be that you think more responsibility of the government, or you could say like we need more community networks so that like we can come together in those moments of crises? Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, definitely. I think there needs to be more programs aided towards like, my community. I live in the Lower East Side, so it's a very like it's aided towards people who are in Section 8 and like all of that. Just to have a more, how do you say, like fast-paced type of help for those people that are really in need at the moment,
What about you, Gabriel? Like, to what extent do you think that it is like a top-down planning issue, kind of like considering for climate change and rising flood waters? And to what extent is it like a programmatic issue or a community-based issue? To what extent do they have to work in tandem?
Well, I agree with Darlene. I think there needs to be programs for like immediate emergency response that are much more prepared than they were during Sandy. But I also think there is an aspect of top-down planning that should happen. I mean, dikes, a system of floodwater control. I think in London they have the Thames Gate. I think we need to start thinking seriously about something like that. Have like a 20-year solution and a 50-year solution.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about that, like the long term, not just like the next 5 years when like, you're going to school, but thinking about like 50, 100 years time, like what are some of the other things that New York City has to be cognizant of to kind of make sure that we're prepared for, be it climate change, like or rising sea levels, like what are these kind of long-term things that we think we should really, what do we need to attack now to make sure that the city's still here and we're still going to be able to kind of thrive within it in that time? Thoughts?
I mean, I think it all goes into like just the basis of raising awareness on these things.
Raising
'cause
awareness.
I feel like a lot of people don't know really the logistics like of like natural disasters in general. Like I feel like in the situation I was in, my parents weren't really like aware of the dangers it was to like stay in the area we were in. So I guess just like, you know, educating people about you know the whole situation.
Awareness and education, definitely. What do you think, Gabriel?
I think we need to promote electric cars and vehicles as much as possible, have charging stations all over the city, and possibly have like government tax rebates, and also just continue to improve bicycle lanes and encourage people to not own a car in New York City and to get around with alternate transportation. I mean, I think that city bikes have been great. I think we need to keep expanding on that and also encouraging people to ride their bike to work instead of take a taxi or an Uber.
Let's talk about transportation a little bit. I mean, do you think that it's sufficient, what we have, like buses, subways? Do you think that it equally serves all people in New York City right now? And should that change for the future?
I do think it needs to be changed.
Yeah?
Just for the sole purpose of like, I guess.
Like how do you get around today as well? Sorry, not to cut you off, but
Well, I actually live like 5 blocks away from my school, so I just
great.
walk every day.
yeah.
But when I do take the bus, it is very slow.
Yep.
So just to improve that, and also like just like like making it more affordable.
Yeah.
I feel like in a way, because
Yeah.
like it's not getting better. It's
Yeah.
just going up and up more every year. So.
What kind of? I mean, it sounds like the only option right now is the bus. Like, would you want to see something like electric cars or like self-driving cars? Like, what would you want to see in your future New York City when you're getting to work? You know.
Definitely, I like all that savvy stuff. Like, I would love to see, you know, all of that. And plus, it's like it's better all around for the environment.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think that New York has the potential to kind of set the trend for that, to be one of the most kind of technologically forward and sustainably forward thinking, or do you think that's going to be another city, or is another city already?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the MTA is super expansive. I mean, the subway lines that we have, one of the largest in the world, I think that it needs to match the size in the standard. I think the standards could be much improved, and I think we should be an example to the rest of the world. And right now, I think we have a lot to work on.
If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing right now about New York City that you think would have the most impact on either you or your friends or your family, what would you change?
Okay, I have 2 things.
Oh, she's got 2 things. She's got 2 magic wands.
Yes. Affordable housing.
Affordable
and free
housing.
college.
And free college?
That's it. That's Mike.
I was also going to say affordable housing. I think that's the single most vital, important issue right now is just a total lack of it and rising housing costs all over the city, making it impossible to have vibrant communities that we need.
How do we kind of make more affordable housing then? If that's like in lieu of magic wands, which we don't have, like what are some of the things that we can do to have more housing at an affordable price? Like, is it something that's in our control? Can we do we have the power to provide more housing that's affordable for New York City citizens?
I mean, I think one important thing to do is expose like corrupt landlords. 'Cause a lot of like landlord slandering is happening right now, and like it's kind of be like hidden in the shadows. So to just like raise awareness on that and like just talk more to like communities that are in need. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, that is a really big issue. It's like, and raising awareness on that issue is like people don't even know what the kind of the ways that landlords push people out of their apartments. It's like very aggressive and and it definitely needs more awareness around it. What do you think, Gabriel?
Yeah, I think we need more government regulation. I
More
think
government
we
regulation.
should reinstate rent control and have regulated caps on rent rather than letting the market dictate all of the housing costs.
Okay, awesome. Well, that kind of wraps it up, guys. Thank you both so much for speaking with me. I really appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Darlene. Thank you.